want to develop my leadership skills, and I'm willing to make that choice. I'm willing to invest in myself. That is a great place to be.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. You're very lucky this week because we have 3 episodes in such a short space of time. It's great to release these episodes in quick succession, but it's also so much content within them. Don't forget to spend the time jotting down your notes in your journal and continuing to learn and take away. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to welcome experiential facilitator and keynote influencer Molly Grisham. Molly is an ex-soccer coach herself and does much to support coaches and athletes within the coaching world by facilitating, supporting, mentoring and delivering a number of workshops which helps them along the way. You can see Molly's great work amongst her socials, and she also runs her own coaching company whereby she can support these coaches as well as athletes. The one course that you may have seen and what is here to promote today is Coach Ready. I was so lucky to undertake Coach Ready in terms of what I was able to take away in terms of the components within the 10 units that were part of this course. Just like myself, I hope you can take much away and I hope you can enjoy this course because it is such a wonderful course which is really worth spending your time doing. The course is a fantastic way of delving into many different areas of athletes' lives, as well as what you can take away to support and manage your teams, as well as developing your athletes within the process. It was great to speak to Molly to find out more about her, having seen much of her work, and I'm fantastically proud to support her work and this course. Now, Molly is there to help build and sustain teams in a wide variety of industries, believing that teams don't just grow apart, they die apart. She knows the elite high-performing teams in all industries get stressed and stretched by the demand to perform. She is passionate about helping teams to rediscover their strengths and restore their relationships so they can rebuild teams. With nearly 2 decades of experiences as a college soccer coach and communication professor, Molly approaches her work as an educator. She meets people where they can help understand themselves and where they want to be. Molly holds a degree in communication from Belmont University, the University of Illinois, and Missouri State University. She has completed training as a civil and family mediator. She is a certified experiential specialist with International Society of Experiential Professionals, and she is certified Myers-Briggs facilitator. Additionally, she is now enrolled in a graduate program on trauma and resiliency. Molly is down to earth and compels her audience to participate in the learning processes. She engages groups from the moment she steps in front of them and leaves them with the tools and processes that they will use long after the event has ended. She knows healthier teams lead to happier humans, and happier humans lead to high-performing teams. When not facilitating, Molly can be found at her favourite used bookstore and at various international restaurants in St. Louis. Now, that was such a wonderful introduction into who Molly is. This Coach Ready course is really going to help you and it is really going to benefit you. I took so much away. So this course includes leadership as in influence, leadership framework, the 4 hours for leaders, managing difficult players and difficult moments, conflict within teams, trauma and teams, leading change, creating high performance culture. And there is so much within this course which you're going to take away. I really enjoyed it and I hope you do too. It is well worth spending your time doing. This is a fantastic episode with Molly Grisham on the Coach Ready course which you can undertake from today. Enjoy it, feedback, learn, grow, develop your team, develop your athletes. This is the Reflective Coach podcast and I'm very happy to support Molly within this approach, within this course and what she was able to bring. Listen to the episode and find out more about her, but really let's delve into it a lot more. So this episode offers a great insight into what this course is really about, but also offers thought-provoking moments where you can really reflect back and take options away in terms of what you want to do and can do, as well as what you can instill within your teams. This can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Podcast Addict, LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, as well as Flickr and TikTok. There are so many different areas where you can see captures, screenshots and shorts, but the full episodes will be on Spotify, YouTube and Podcast Addict. The podcast will now be on video format on Spotify, which I'm proud to release. But please do consider dropping that follow, dropping that subscribe and that like, as well as some comments. They really do help the podcast and it is really appreciated, especially across all of those platforms. Any feedback is always appreciated, and you can find the podcast on Twitter, which is at @TRC_podcast_. As you can see, I'm @Anthony_Luca96. It's the Reflective Coach podcast everywhere else. I hope you enjoy it. This is a fantastic episode with Molly Grisham and the Coach Ready course.
And I think a lot of our athletes think of leadership as power. And the struggle with that is positional power has to be given to you, but it can also be taken away from you. We have to interact with our team in a way that we just look at our team and say, well, somebody here sees me as the most influential person in their life. So I'm just going to treat everybody as if they are that person. I'm going to maximize that influence. I'm going to assume that they are watching every move I make. I think one of the greatest gifts a leader can give someone else is giving them the opportunity to lead. Sometimes we just have to get out of the way and create some space and let someone else have that opportunity. How are you?
I'm good. You okay?
Yeah, doing good.
Good. Glad to hear.
Thanks for making time for me.
That's right. No problems at all. It's always a pleasure and always time for you doing wonderful things. So it's great to really delve in and hear about them and all the great things that you're doing even further.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm trying every day to just show up and do the best I can.
Well, smashing it. I really loved everything that I saw up in the build-up. But as soon as I watched it, even the quality of the videos, the lighting, the way that comes across, the what people might think is common. The little details that goes into it. That's absolutely massive.
Yeah, it makes a difference. If I'm going to do something, let's do it right.
Absolutely. So so you've developed this wonderful course, and you've got a wide array of history and experience behind you. The CV is endless and exciting, but there's nothing better than a personal introduction to who you are and what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's great that you've developed this, and it's over a period of time, and I think it's going to benefit so many who come on, and it's such wonderful content because it makes you think about two different perspectives, or thinking of ways that you could even get leaders into play or develop those, whereby sometimes you might brush over that or might only look for those who might stand out as leaders, but there's so much within that. But there's 10 wonderful units as part of this course. There's so much within it, and it's great that you're going to share this and really get it out and then build upon this great work you're doing.
Yeah, I'm excited to share it, and I'm excited to have a conversation about it today.
Fantastic. Likewise. Before we get started, good holiday though in the build-up.
Yeah, not too bad. I've scheduled a few vacations here and there. I'll hit the ground really next week, just being at a lot of universities with a lot of athletic teams. So I know I need to rest a little bit before I do that. So I've had a good chance to relax a little.
I love that, and I love that you've built in breaks as well, because sometimes as coaches we may think, right, I have to do this, have to do that. I have to work late evenings, have to balance even more plates. And there was a great saying that was going around on social media, maybe was criticised in a way. It was called mini retirements. But when I first initially listened to that, I was like, they do exist, because if you have a week away, you're switching off from everything completely. You're retiring from that sort of mind frame and that life, and then you're getting back in the swing of things. So I'm completely behind that, and in that way that you're doing things, you're sort of having mini retirements to regenerate and go again.
Yeah, and I've been really intentional about that in the summer, but also in the winter. I think we have this pattern of taking vacations in the summer, but we need them throughout the year as well. So usually between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I take some downtime and just recharge so I can show up for other people.
Love that. And I think it's needed as well. And it's great because it links in nicely in terms of this Coach Ready course, which you've developed and is there for coaches ready to sign up to be part of, and to really delve into their learning and thinking and take that into their coaching journey. So, it's all about that Coach Ready and being there. And this is great how you've established this. So, it's 10 units, lots of learning, lots of delving into. So let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Let's do it.
Love that. So for you, if you had to summarize what the Coach Ready course is and what it is for coaches, what is it?
Yeah, technically it's a self-guided online course. And for me, it really came from this place of recognizing that coaching can be so life-giving. It can be incredible. Like when we're winning, life is so good. But it can also take a lot from you. And I think right now we have a lot of coaches who are running on empty and feeling undervalued and underappreciated. And I wanted to figure out what's a way I could give them a lifeline. Like, what's a way I could fill a coach's cup and help them out, help them to be better. I also recognize that I have a lot of clients, particularly in college athletics, that have a large budget and they get a little bit more access to me than, say, a high school coach or a mid-major coach. And that didn't feel right to me. And I thought, how could I take all the wisdom and all the knowledge and all the frameworks that I often share with some of those elite level coaches and make it accessible for anyone who's a coach, whether it's a youth coach or a grassroots coach or a high school coach? Could I package it in a way that's affordable? And so doing an online course made sense to me from a financial perspective, that a lot of people could have access to, that it could be affordable to them. And I would not have to compromise, as you already mentioned at the beginning, just the quality of it, really being able to put a good product together that would be accessible and affordable for lots and lots of coaches.
Well, I completely agree, and I'm glad that you've looked at maybe what may not be saturated, so whereby those other markets can then tap into you and what's affordable. So when it comes down to developing courses, obviously high prices can be slapped on straight away, and I've done a few of them online. And when it comes down to that, you sort of have your modules, you have like a Q&A at the end, you have like maybe a quiz, and then you can do it all online at your self-pace. And it's similar with your course, but with yours you have such high quality detail, and it delves into you and your experiences, because you're able to share those frameworks which you deliver with your clients, and then you're able to put that online, whereby it's on an auditory and visual level, but it just inspires you and makes you take away so much, and I think it was wonderful just watching the videos, and just what it was able to capture and how you came across in that is so much more than just your typical here's the online modules, this is the course, do the quiz, and you'll get a certificate at the end of it.
Right. Yeah, that's so good to hear. I'm glad you found value in it. That's my hope for everyone who makes that investment in themselves, that they feel like there was a quality return on this investment. And I think with a lot of online courses, there's a lot of people who say, well, I'm just going to charge a lot, so I only have to sell a few. And I thought, I'm going to flip that script. I want this to go out to the masses. I want everyone to have access to this. So let's set it at a low price point so that it is affordable and is accessible for people.
And I love that, and I think it's great that you are doing that and flip the script in terms of what might be the norm, and that's great for coaches as well, because even for coaches, they might think, right, the learning is right, I'll do my USF badges, I'll go on and do UEFA, this is what the coaching pathway is. But it's, learning is so much more than that. It's having the conversations like yourself, or tapping into the way that you think, or those frameworks, or how leaders really think, and that might not be something that might be on a typical course, but then how you really develop that. So learning comes in all forms and ways, but the way that you come across and bring that, I think it just encaptures what true learning is, and how coaches can really tap into this and take so much away.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that.
No worries. Well, thank you for giving me access and being part of that, and really helping bring this to life, because it's great to see what you are doing, but then to be part of that and see that and bring it even further. I think there's a lot of coaches who will benefit from it, and it's great that you're enabling them to do so.
Glad to do it.
No problems at all. But when it comes down to it, then obviously you said about coaches burning out, they're balancing a lot of plates, they're taking a lot on. So you've got a lot of experiences behind you, and you're in a good place, and also you're taking vacations, you're planning times out. You're quite big on that now, and making sure that happens. But whilst you were before you were in that mindset, or maybe got to this point, was there points within your coaching career whereby you were looking at that going, right, I'm burning out now, and not realizing it at the time perhaps?
It was so interesting to me. So I spent about 20 years in coaching, and then 6 years ago, I walked away from that and started my own business. And one of the first things that kind of shocked my system was weekends. I thought, people have weekends? They have a Saturday and a Sunday where they don't work? Like, what do they do with these 2 days where there's no work? Because I was so used to, as a coach, working 7 days a week. And so I can look back now and see just some really unhealthy habits. My weight was always fluctuating. My workout schedule was so inconsistent. My relationships, in many ways, suffered because I would have to say, well, I'm in season right now. Just go away. I'll come back at the end of the season and regroup with friends and people that I care about. And so I can look back at my own career and say that I was not the healthiest person. And then I can also see that same thing in so many of the coaches that I work with now, that they are struggling to balance all of that. And so, in many ways, I think of myself as an ally or an advocate or a lifeline who can come alongside them and say, it doesn't have to be this way. We can do some things a little bit differently. We can take some realities kind of from the corporate world and apply them to athletics in the same way that we can take so many great things from athletics and apply those to the corporate world. But I think when you've been in an environment where you've just done things the same way for so long, you normalize it. You say this is normal. Everybody works 7 days a week. No, not everyone works 7 days a week. And being able to help coaches see things a little bit differently, have a little bit healthier perspective, and even give them permission. Sometimes we just need an outside voice to say, it's really okay to turn your phone off at night. You don't have to reply to every text message. It's okay to go spend some time with your family. It's okay to recharge. People need that reminder. And I look back on my career and think, I would have been a better coach if I had had somebody reminding me of that.
I completely agree, and I've been in those positions as well, whereby I've gone to the cinema and then I'm conscious of the fact that I can't answer my phone for like 2 hours, because I want to get back to people, or I'm like, I'm not immediately available. But that's completely the wrong mindset to have, because I should go and take those times for myself, and I should be selfish, because if I look back and I didn't go to the cinema at those points, who really benefited? Well, those at that time, but not me. So I've missed out. But how many of those are going to appreciate and take that away because we're making it common norm, and not all these appreciations are coming into play, which can be difficult. And we associate sports with health and fitness, and everyone, sort of being in that healthy mindset as well as physically. But when it comes to coaches, we're doing such a job for our athletes and giving so much time. Realistically, our health is on the back burner because we're having late nights, we're having long days, we're coaching on weekends, we're not taking time to refresh and regenerate, we're eating on the go, we're eating late, our habits are all over the place. And it's sometimes we look at coaches and go, that's not a healthy coach. Why they're coaching? It's like, because their lifestyle's not allowing them to do, because they're putting the health of everyone else before theirs.
Yeah, I remember when I was still a college coach, how many of my meals I ate from a concession stand at a recruiting event. Like eating nachos with that fake cheese on it. That's not a healthy lunch. What was I doing? But I did that stuff all the time because everybody else around me did it, and we just normalized it for ourselves. And we've got to do better. If we want coaches to be good role models and coaches to teach their athletes how to be healthy, we have to model that as well.
Absolutely, and there's a lot about modelling behaviours right throughout your course, and there's a lot which we're going to touch on a lot more, but there are those roles and responsibilities which come into play, and then those rules we can sort of set for ourselves within that in terms of just how we approach our everyday habits and what that looks like in terms of a norm. So, those habits should be rituals to us, and they're not things that we should have, whole focus on as such, because they should happen naturally. But there is a cycle that we can end up going within, and sometimes when that cycle goes wrong, such as eating those nachos and those chips, how can we change that cycle and tap into it? Therefore, to be very conscious of what that cycle looks like to turn it into a healthy one rather than an unhealthy cycle. So that's a really important reflection point for coaches, but that's how they can model those behaviors for their athletes and then really touch upon how to work with their athletes to an even further degree.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really high-performing coaches do well is they surround themselves with people who have a different perspective. And so coaches that might be a basketball coach that are high performing are not just around coaches, and certainly not just around basketball coaches, but they're talking to CEOs and presidents of organizations and people in other industries and saying, how do you guys do things? And how can we do things differently here? I think we get ourselves in trouble when we say, I'm a soccer coach, I only hang out with soccer people. Well, then we're just all going to do the same thing all the time. And so we've really got to diversify our network and learn from people in other industries and think with an open mind about how we could apply some of those things that work in other places within our own context.
Absolutely, and I completely agree there. And doing some reading earlier on in the week, it's literally as if you've memorized some pages which are out of my book that I've read. And it's completely true because some of the coaches that I've been speaking to, some of the considerations that we've had, is that alignment and how that looks. So whether the language aligns, how those behaviors, those values, how everyone forms and gets into place for, the program and how that looks. But having, success and a high performance, that actually flips itself on its head. And do we really need alignment? So we might need alignment towards some values, but that in terms of vision and how we think needs to operate differently, because unless we get those different perspectives, then those alignments just going to become robotic and just a mundane process. We're not really having the other thoughts and challenging behaviors which may think, right, you know what, I actually need to change that, or this is changing my thinking, or giving yourselves a different perspective. So I think there's that right balance and right opportunity to look, right, how can I surround myself with people who might challenge my thinking outside the norm which I've always been accustomed to.
Yeah, and I would add, I think really healthy coaches give their staff permission to bring that stuff up as well. And so a really high performing, healthy head coach is going to say to that young first year assistant coach, hey, I need you to be honest with me. And I need you to tell me if you see me going down a bad road, if you see me exhibiting some really unhealthy behaviors, I need you to tell me. I need you to be honest with me. Whereas a really egocentric coach that couldn't care less what their staff thinks is going to miss out on those perspectives and those opportunities to really be cared for by their staff as well.
Absolutely, and that giving that space and that empowerment while supporting the coaches to develop that mindset and that cohesion in terms of that space that's available. That leads nicely into leadership as influence, which is part of one of your units. So leadership as influence and what it is. How does that look for Molly, and how does she display this in terms of how she could bring this across?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about leadership as influence rather than what I would call positional power. And I think a lot of our athletes think of leadership as power. And the struggle with that is positional power has to be given to you, but it can also be taken away from you. And that's the part most young people don't think about. They think, oh, I got the captain's armband. I got the title of being a captain. The coach said I'm a leader. Yeah, but we could also bring you in and say, give me that armband back. You're no longer a captain. You're no longer a leader. But the truth is we all have relational influence. And one of the ways I often talk to teams about this is I say, imagine that a player came out to practice and she has had a bad day. Oh my gosh, she failed a test today. Her parents left her an angry voicemail. Somebody broke up with her. She's just in a bad mood. Would that impact the feeling at practice? And of course, the team is like, yes, we hate when that happens. We hate when someone's having a bad day. I'm like, yeah, but what if she's not your best player? She's not a captain. She's not a leader. Does it still impact the team? And they're like, yes, it does. And of course it does, because we all have relational influence. And so we have to be aware that we have it. So what do we want to do with it? And so for me, as a business owner, basically a party of one, I don't have a team of people that I'm leading. I am asking myself every single day, what do I want to do with my influence today? How do I want to leverage my influence in positive and healthy ways? How do I want to maximize that? And I think when we can get athletes to shift their thinking from, I really wish someone would give me some power, to, I have influence, and how do I want to use that on a team? It's a game changer for them, and it really gets them buying in to the leadership that they already have, rather than waiting for someone to give them leadership, their ability to recognize, I have it, I have influence, and what do I want to do with that every single day?
I think that's a great question and a great reflection point as well, because it interlinks nicely with some of the coaches that I've spoken to in one conversation that I've had this week. So it's sort of created this storytelling narrative whereby then you're contextualizing it, whereby that what you bring in those questions really builds upon that. So when we're coaching and working with players, we're leaving some of our energies and some of our character upon them. So they're going to represent our personality. So again, that comes into relational influence, because we're influencing them through the relationships that we have whilst coaching and working with them. So then these players might go off one day, they might be playing a game, but they're going to represent what you've instilled as a coach, or even then your habits which come across as well, which you might not have been aware of instilling, but they're going to take away because of those personality traits traits whereby it's become through that relational influence. So therefore, you have to think how that rubs off in your team and how that comes across. So we have to look at that positive dynamic and how that is influenced in the team. But it's about leveraging it, as you say, and how you leverage it is really important because, again, it's how that representation of the team comes across. So if we're leveraging it, then the team's going to be represented in a good way and the players are able then to learn from that. So it's about maximizing that influence, which then becomes rooted in, that relational influence rather than, rooting in positional power of going, this is what my team is going to look like and this is my personality, for example.
Yeah, I often tell coaches, as we think about this topic, that there is someone on your roster for whom you are the most influential adult in their life. For someone on your roster, you're the most stable person, you're the most reliable person. You see something in them that no one else sees in them. You hold them to a standard no one else has ever held. And the challenge is, we usually don't know who that player is. It's not like that player shows up and says, Coach, I just wanted to tell you, you're the most influential person in my life. We don't know. And so we have to interact with our team in a way that we just look at our team and say, well, somebody here sees me as the most influential person in their life. So I'm just going to treat everybody as if they are that person. I'm going to maximize that influence. I'm going to assume that they are watching every move I make and they're making a mental note and they're replicating my behaviors. Let's just go ahead and assume it's every player. But I am certain on every team, there is somebody who looks at their coach and says, that's the most reliable adult, most dependable adult that I have. We just usually don't know. And I know in my coaching career, the times I did find that out was like 5 years down the road. Someone would send me a note and say, hey, I know this is long overdue, but I wanted you to know. And I'm like, gosh, if I had known that then, I might have done things differently. So let's go ahead and assume that. Just assume that you're the most influential person in their life and act that way so that you leverage that influence.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you there because, as I say, there are moment captures. So we might look back and reflect upon when we were players. So, there's moments when I was a young player which stand out in my head, and sometimes I don't really understand why I've got this tiny little moment captured in the play clips within my head, for example. But they're there for a reason, and then, if other players are taking that away and they've got those capture moments, then they're realistically going to be thinking of those times that they had with you 5 years before. So whilst you've gone on and lived your life, you're doing something else, you're out with your family, you're, doing different types of coaching, you're working, you're cracking on with life, they're sometimes having these clips played within their head, so you're having that impact on them, which therefore then they've clipped something and it's kept with them. So we might not be thinking about it, but later on in the night or later on in life it still sits with them. So it's really important, that perspective and the way that comes across, and knowing the position that we're in, that leadership and that influence is really going to have an impact. So sometimes when we are sitting there watching a film, whatever, they might actually be thinking about it over and over in their head. So there is a lot which comes into play when it comes down to that psychology and the way those players think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's great.
No worries at all, but it is great. And, it's not to take too much away from the course, because otherwise that would be a free course which has been delved into one. But we have to sort of touch on some points, but not to give it all away. And it's nice that you create these frameworks for coaches, for leaders, how that can work for their players. And sometimes we want to develop leaders, we want to develop some of our players within the team, but we're not really sure how we go about developing a framework or developing a style, how to instill that. And sometimes frameworks can be a really simple process and not overcomplicated. And that's one of the things that I took away, which was really nice, because as you watch your videos and as you're listening, you're going, right, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is 3, and this is 4. And then suddenly you've got 4 nice little steps whereby you can then build upon that and really go into that detail. And that comes into play because you've developed a really nice framework for 4 steps of becoming a leader. And they're really about, yourself in that position, and then how that could go for others as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, to your point, frameworks don't have to be complex, but sometimes it's really hard to see it when you're in it. So you're a coach, you're trying to figure out, how do I develop my leaders? Like, is there a book? Is there something, like, what do I do? And then when you can zoom out and have someone like me come along and say, well, actually, there's 4 clear steps. It's like, how did I not see that? Well, because you were in the eye of the storm. But I love sharing those 4 specific steps with people because it simplifies what often feels like such a complex process. And so I really wanted to name these 4 steps because I often have young, emerging leaders who show up on a team and they're like, Molly, I am ready to be the leader today. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm ready. And I certainly believe like a young person can be a leader on a team. I don't think you have to be the oldest person. Just because you lived a few more days doesn't mean you're a better leader than someone else. But I like to take them through those 4 steps. So let's name those 4 things for your listeners. The first is, I believe you have to lead yourself. So if a young person comes to me and says, I am ready to lead this team, and I'm like, great, you forgot your shoes for training today, you were 10 minutes late, and you're failing half your classes. You're not leading yourself. So you can't lead this team until you can lead yourself. I also think it's a really good reminder for people that at a bare minimum, you have to be responsible for leading your own life. So when a young person says to me, like, I'm not really interested in being a leader, like, I just want to score goals, I just want to be a great defender, I don't want to be a leader. Well, you have to lead your life. At a bare minimum, no one can do that for you. So let's start there. So the first to me is, can you lead yourself? If you can lead yourself, then we can move to the second, which is, can you lead your peers? And for me, that's who are the equals on your team. So if we were talking about a high school team, can a freshman lead the other freshman? Can a sophomore lead the other sophomore? Who are the people that are equal to you, that you can leverage that influence? And oftentimes this comes up with coaches who will say, I don't see leaders until they're seniors. That's when we start developing them. And I'll say, yeah, but your freshmen, the first weekend they're on campus, if it's a college team, and you've got a group of freshmen that are about to go make some bad decisions, don't you want one voice in that group that can say, guys, we have practice at 6 a.m. Like, what are we doing? This is not a good decision. And so we need people who can lead their peers. So before you can lead the team, can you lead your equals? And then the third is, can you lead the people that play the same position as you? So if you're a defender, can you lead the back 4? And that's really important because that's a microcosm of leading the larger team. Because in that pool of defenders, you're going to have players that are older than you, players that are younger than you, players with more experience, players with less experience, players with more commitment, players with less commitment, players that are easy to lead and players that are hard to lead. So can you lead the people that you have a relationship with? If you can do those 3 things, now you're ready to talk about leading your team. And what I have found is, as I share that framework with players, it's like I've given them a path to leadership. It removes this mystery of, how do I get named a captain? That's the only way to lead on this team. I got to figure that out. How do I get the votes? How do I win the contest? No, just start with leading yourself first, and then be intentional about leading your peers, and then be intentional about leading the people who play the same position as you. And before you know it, now the team is looking to you to lead, and you can leverage that influence rather than waiting to be given positional power.
I absolutely love that, and I love that framework and how you've expanded on that as well. I loved how you touched upon the point whereby if you allow these players to go off and make these decisions, you're missing an opportunity for them to really enhance and address the opportunity of leadership and modelling those behaviours before they get to a decision and those actions, which could be displayed as negative and quite challenging. So there is opportunities, and sometimes we miss them because we're waiting for that right time. And again, that builds in nicely to, right, we can actually strategically plan here, and we can set aside, actually we can get in before letting this play out.
Yeah, and it gives us something to look for as a coaching staff. So we can sit down and say, who on this team can't lead themselves? Okay, we got some work to do with those people, because if we're going to leverage our influence as coaches, we don't want them to leave our program, whether we have them 1 year in club sports or whether we have them for 4 years in high school and college, whatever that is. We don't want them to leave our program not being able to lead themselves. That would be a disservice. We would not be leveraging our influence. But it also gives a coaching staff permission to say, okay, I know that freshman class just got here, but we can already see those 2 can lead themselves. Let's dive in and encouraging them to lead their peers. Let's give them that green light. Let's name that for them. Because I've yet to share this framework and have players go, yeah, that's obvious. We know this. It's a light bulb for all of them. Like, oh, my peers. Okay, I can do that. I can do that. And so it just gives us a simple way to set people up for success rather than assuming they're going to figure it out and someday they're just going to know how to lead the team. It's not going to happen accidentally.
And I think, again, that relational influence comes into a position of leadership. So you're not having to lead that team or be the exact team captain, but could you lead that back four? And that gives you that opportunity because, you might not be ready to step up to be the team captain, or you might not have that position to be there yet, or you might not want to. But over time, you're going to develop going, do you know what, I could actually lead the team or be in that position. But being that actual leader in a back four or in a unit gives you opportunity to develop that right throughout the team. Therefore, then you're developing that entire leadership. But it gives more roles and responsibilities within the team and gives more opportunity because sometimes we go, right, leadership is my captain, my vice captain, and they're my two leaders, they're my captains. But realistically, then, how many other leaders are you not missing out on? How many other players are you not developing in the leaders whereby they might not know it yet? But if they can lead on those units, I think that's a wonderful opportunity for them to do so, as well as that highlight again as coaching staff to really address and create the time to develop that.
Well, and I'll tell you this, I've never had a coach call me and say, Molly, we have a problem. We have too many leaders. It's just, we're in crisis, too many leaders. Now, there certainly have been teams where there have been power-hungry people. That has been distractive. But I've never had a coach say, our problem is we have a goalkeeper who leads the goalkeepers, and we have a center back who leads the center backs, and we have a point guard who leads the point guards, and we have a setter who leads, whatever the sport is. I've never had that happen. And so if we can develop this mindset of healthy leadership and giving them a progression and giving them a path, it relieves some of the weight that we often put on two people, that we say, okay, these two people, they got to do it all. They don't actually have to do it all. If you've got a team full of people who can lead themselves, life just got better for your leaders. And if you've got a team full of people who will influence their peers, that just got better for the leaders. And so really thinking about developing leaders at all different stages and all different ages and in all different ways on your team. I've never had a coach call and say, crisis, we've got to get rid of some of our leaders. It just doesn't happen. And we need more leaders, not just those two captains that we've designated in that way.
And that can go for coaching staff as well, because as much as we might be the head coach or in that position, and we may think all the responsibility falls on us, or we take it on board to really have control over everything. Sometimes if we've got those leaders and those people that we can trust, and we can embed them with opportunity to really rise and take upon those, we can share it and then get into a position that we can relax and then go and watch those films or go and do things with the family. And don't forget, it is hard to relinquish control, and that's again where that mindset comes in about how you go about doing it. But if you've got those leaders, you've got those coaches, then look upon them and support them and develop those leaderships to do so.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest gifts a leader can give someone else is giving them the opportunity to lead. Sometimes we just have to get out of the way and create some space and let someone else have that opportunity. And do it in a way where we say, like, I'm just going to step to the side, but I'm going to have your back. If you need help, if you're struggling, I'm right here to help you, but I'm going to get out of the way a little bit. I'm going to let you do your thing. It's a gift that we give others. And if we can see it that way, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I have to give up control. No, I'm giving my assistant coach that I really respect a gift. And that gift is I'm going to get out of the way a little bit and let them lead. It changes, that reframe changes how we embrace those moments.
And again, flipping that back on itself, you're gifting players the opportunity as well. So they may realise that's an opportunity for them to take control or be that coach which may have recognised something within themselves whereby another coach hasn't recognised that. So over 5 coaches that they may have over their playing career, if Coach Molly has gifted them that opportunity to be the leader at that point and they've never had it then again, or they've never been in that position because of the players that are at the other teams, for example, you've had that highlight and that impact, and therefore they've been able to clip it and capture those moments. And that's living with on. And 5 years later, they contact you going, do you know what? I thrived off that, and now look what I'm doing away from the soccer field and so on. But I think gifts in those moments and those times and how you can put it into play in terms of that relational influence is really important within that framework. And as you say, leadership is influence. And I think that wraps up nicely entirely how you can support a player within a framework like yours.
Yeah, I'm excited to see coaches put this into practice. And my hope is I hear from coaches who can say, oh, we did this stuff and things are different on our team. It's really going to be fun to watch that unfold.
Absolutely, and again, I think it touches upon nicely upon your point and something which was consistent throughout. Be intentional. So that could be
Mhm.
an array of things following that, but just that be intentional. And if you're intentional about gifting that player and giving them that opportunity, or giving them a framework, or allowing them to step up to be leaders, they're really going to remember that, and then you're going to really emphasize that in terms of how you model that behavior right throughout the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've all got to be intentional about leveraging our influence.
I love that, but again, that can be played in so many different ways. And one that I really took away was be intentional about giving players a path to become leader on teams. So I think that that is so nice within itself, just to have a simple right. What is this? How can I be intentional? Boom. How can I be intentional today? Boom. And then you're building in those natural habits and natural ways of doing things, which then develops that framework, then supports the players to do so within the team. And then you're going to really see that application and the growth of coaches within this process.
Yeah. Yep. It's wild what a simple framework can do.
Absolutely. And some coaches, on the back of that might be thinking, right, I got some players at times, they might not be natural leaders. So when these players approach you, and as you said, they might come to you and go, Molly, how can I do this or how can I do that? Sometimes you might look at a player and go, right, I don't see the natural ability in them. They're not ready yet, or they're not my leader. But have you ever had an occasion where you might have seen that or might have gone, do you know what? I can't see that, but how could I actually develop you into a leader? How can I evolve you? How can I get you to that point rather than dismissing you?
Absolutely. I not only think that leadership is influence, I also think it's a skill and a choice. And so when you've got a young player who says, I want to develop my leadership skills and I'm willing to make that choice, I'm willing to invest in myself, that is a great place to be. And when you think historically about, soccer was my sport, that was my background, but there are some incredible soccer players who weren't naturally gifted at a young age, but there was something about the sport that they loved. And so they made the choice to develop their skills. In fact, there's an Alex Morgan commercial out right now where she was talking about, as a kid, I was not that good, but I loved it and I just wanted to get better. If that's your mindset about leadership, oh my gosh, please, I want to work with you. If you're willing to say to me, I see the value in leadership. I see how it makes a difference on our team. I see how it could propel us forward. I want to do that, but I don't know how. Great. Let's make that choice to invest in your leadership skills. If we are only looking for players who just show up as natural leaders, it's going to be few and far between. In the same way, we would say we would all love to have just a prolific goal scorer. We usually have to develop those people and we're going to have to develop our leaders as well. But when I hear somebody say, I want to develop my skills and I'm willing to put in that work, I'm willing to make that choice, great, let's go. Let's dive in. That's a great place to be as a coach.
And again, that's where real coaching comes into, and then that player management. Because rather than dismissing them or going, right, you're not the leader, or I can't see that. If you're getting into them and you're making a choice like the player has made that choice, you can really help
Yeah.
influence them in that framework and that mental mindset whereby you can develop those leaders or opportunities for them to do so. So again, if they've been dismissed in the past or they're dismissed in the future, you can be that one coach who stands out that gave them the opportunity because you made that choice to give them the time to really help enhance and develop them as leaders and to start developing a way whereby they can start to think in certain processes that will allow them to take that forward long term as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love the art of coaching, and that's completely where it is. And that touches in again so nicely in terms of that communication. So again, how you communicate, how you teach, and understanding why. So understanding why you might be a leader, understanding your position, understanding your influence. And you might not be a captain as such yet, but you still have those leadership qualities. So you influence others. So understand why you influence them, and then understand how you could influence them. So you could be a leader in the dressing room whereby you see some players complaining,
Absolutely.
they've changed the environment environment, they change the dynamic, but you could be the one to go in there and say, X, Y, and Z, or you could change that terminology or complete dynamic within the room, whereby then it's supportive of what we want to do as a team in terms of our values and what we want to instill on the pitch. So that builds on nicely again into that culture fit, which really plays a big part.
Yeah, and I think for most sports, there are more players on the bench than there are in the game. And so if our leaders are also key players, who's leading on the bench? Because we all know a bench can totally change a game. The energy drain or the frustration or the negativity can absolutely destroy success on the field. And so if our leaders are only our star players, we are missing some really, really critical leadership moments, because you're right. It is in the locker room. It is in warm-ups. It is, if you're traveling to a game together, those leaders have to influence those moments to set a team up for success. And that just can't fall on just 2 or 3 people. It's just not possible.
And I think you make such a good point there, which may be not considered by coaches. So you are going to have more players on the bench than actually on the field. And sometimes, coaches speak, oh, yeah, I got a squad of 30 or I got a squad of 35. But then they're not realistically thinking how many are on the bench. And therefore, you've got a huge influence. And then you're managing a lot of off the field rather than on the field, because you've got more players off than on. So then how does that look in terms of your environment? How do the leaders look? And what are they doing to influence that? And therefore, how do you manage all of those personalities? And how do you manage it as a collective before, as they say, losing the dressing room? And you need to create that collective to then really enhance your culture, and making sure it fits in terms of how the leadership and how that influence really builds upon what that culture fit is, how that looks. And sometimes it may be an opportunity, or we may have to move players on because they don't fit. And we've asked that key question, can this player continue with us, or are they the wrong culture fit, for example?
Yeah, I often say to coaches, when you're recruiting your team, and whether that's a college team or whether that's a U12 team, what is your metric for recruiting leaders? And most of the time they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you probably have some sort of form and you're making notes on their left foot and their right foot and their ability to serve a ball, and do they communicate well? But where on that sheet does it talk about leadership? And most of the time coaches are like, it's not there. But if we're going to have a squad, to your point, of 30 or 35 people, we're probably going to have to intentionally recruit people who have some leadership skills or leadership potential or leadership desire. Because if we're going to have 20 people on our bench and there are no leaders on the bench, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Just mathematically, we're in trouble. And so we've got to be intentional about bringing the right people in who are hungry to grow and learn as leaders. And that has to happen in our recruiting process. We have to think about that when we're selecting our team. Does this person have the ability to help us in terms of leadership?
Again, I think that's such an important reflection point, and you asked such a key question. What is the metric for developing or identifying leaders? And when you identify leaders, it can be difficult. And again, whilst you're looking at that technical ability on a talent ID showcase or event, etc., you might be missing out on that absolute key of what is the metric for leaders and how we're identifying them. So I think that's a key reflection point for coaches to really take away, or as they listen to this, they might have that little light bulb moment themselves. And that's something that they can take away. And again, that sort of naturally builds in nicely to as you have these leaders, as you have this team, as you have all this influence off the field and the size of it. Friction and conflict can play a position within this, and there are different conflict styles and groups, and sometimes we might not want to address the influence or the negative. We may not want to address some of our higher influence leaders, whereby they have this personality and character where they could be challenging, or they're the biggest in the room in terms of that personality and the way they come across, and sometimes we fall then into different phases or different styles whereby we're not addressing what we need to do. So again, that's such an important point, and that I love this quote as well. Friction creates traction, and I loved how you related that to the tire in terms of that. But then how you then broke that down into 5 default conflict styles and groups.
Yeah. So In Coach Ready, we did a unit on conflict and teams. And I love working with teams on conflict resolution because usually they walk into the room and they see that we're going to talk about conflict, or they've heard that we're going to talk about conflict, and they are nervous. It's the last thing they want to do. And I love helping them shed a little bit healthier light on conflict. So instead of having this mindset of we have to get rid of it, there's conflict, get rid of it, just get rid of it. No, what an opportunity. What an opportunity to figure out we're not very good at this. And that has showed up on our team, and we can be a little bit better. And I think it parallels really nicely to kind of how we tend to coach teams. We're not trying to micromanage and control every move in a game, but a game is the greatest teacher for a coach. It helps us understand, my goodness, we can't serve a ball in the final third to save our lives. Okay, that's what we're going to work on. And conflict in many ways is the same thing. It shows up and it tells us, wow, we are not very good at fill in the blank. Let's get better at that. And so you're right. I shared a quote that I often share with teams, which is friction creates traction. And so sometimes there's some hard stuff that shows up on our teams and it feels like friction, like, oh gosh, I don't like this. But friction creates traction. And so if we will lean into those moments of discomfort and the things that feel like a negative conflict and let it move us forward, let it help us get that traction to go to a new place, boy, that's a really healthy thing for a team. And I mentioned in the course, I was driving one time and my car dealership had told me, like, you probably need to get some new tires here in the near future. And I thought, I can put it off. I can put it off just a few more months. And sure enough, I was driving in rain and I started to notice it was really hard to keep going forward. Like I was sliding a little bit side to side because there was no friction to create any traction. There wasn't a lot on those tires. And so I'm spending my time going side to side instead of going forward. And we do that same thing as teams. We're trying to dodge the conflict. We're moving side to side. Well, let's let it propel us forward. And instead of saying conflict is a really negative thing, could conflict be a teacher that tells us where we can be better, how we can be better? That to me is how high performing teams approach that. And we talk about in Coach Ready, the 5 default conflict styles. And when you understand that, it's a game changer because I might think, man, I really hate you. I don't like you at all. I don't like your personality. I don't like how you treat me. I don't like you. And then I find out, actually, we just have opposite default conflict styles. And I just don't really like who you are in conflict. And you probably don't like who I am in conflict. But I actually find out you're a really good guy and I like you. It's just our conflict styles are different. It changes things on a team. It allows us to say, this wasn't personal. This isn't about your personality. This isn't about who you are. It's just we handle conflict differently. And we can start to have an appreciation for default conflict styles when we understand what those are. And I also think for coaches, we have to understand our default conflict style because as much as we would like to think, well, I'm the coach, I'm not involved in the conflict. Oh, we are involved in the conflict. We absolutely are. And knowing our default conflict style and what we bring to a conflict, positive or negative, is really, really important on a team.
Absolutely. I love that you've delved into that even further because it builds, it tracks back nicely to that mindset and how we have to have those different personalities to then create those different types of mindsets whereby as a leader, how can we take that on board and alter our thinking to take that into our delivery? And I think conflict and approaching that can be hard and it can be difficult. But by following those, that framework of developing leadership and that influence, you then develop a mindset in terms of how then you can analyze and review the different stands of those points within those 5 conflict styles that exist, and then you can really look to find a position whereby you can then address conflict and then take it into the benefit of your team and how you take that forward.
Yeah, it's interesting with each of the 5 default conflict styles, there's pros and there's cons, there's good and there's bad. And one of the default conflict styles is called assertive. And these people in conflict become really focused on what's the task at hand, what's the problem, what do we need to do. And sometimes it can feel like those people don't care about the feelings of other people because they're just like, let's get this done, let's get this solved. And I sometimes struggle with those people because I feel like they can be abrasive. But what I love about those really assertive people is they will say the thing that needs to be said. And I've been a part of teams where we've been in a locker room or a classroom, and you just think, who's going to say it? Who's going to say the thing that needs to be said? Like, who's going to name the thing in the room? And it's always those people that fall into the assertive category. And so it's so easy to look at them and say, well, you're too assertive, you're too aggressive, you're too much, you don't care about people. And yet they're the ones that will say the thing that needs to be said. And so with each of the default conflict styles, there's good and there's some hard stuff to work through. And when we can embrace the good in all the conflict styles and understand what they bring to the team, it's a game changer on a team, because instead of saying, I wish that guy would just shut up, like he's just too much, we can say, yeah, but when it needs to be said, he's the one that will say it for us.
Absolutely, and there's so much within that as well, and so much within the course where you can really listen to that in further, and how you can take that away, and really delve into what those 5 areas are, as Molly says. But we've looked at leadership as an influence. We've looked at a leadership framework. We've looked at the team leaders and how that comes across. Touching upon that conflict, then you can sort of look at managing difficult players in difficult moments, and that's another key area within itself, because we are going to have those personality, we are going to have those players, and there are going to be difficult moments which are going to be had. So that touches upon that culture fit. So if we're asking whether a player fits in part of that culture, that's going to be a difficult moment within itself. So then conflict's going to arise, and then we may be avoiding it, and then that's how that creates that all-round circle and that cycle. But managing difficult players and difficult moments is a real consideration within itself.
It really is. And so in Coach Ready, I share a 5-part framework. Again, it's so simple, but when you're in the storm, you often don't see that. And for me, the first 4 in that framework fall on the shoulders of the coaches. We got to teach better. We got to coach better. We got to set our players up for success. It's the last one that falls on the player. And that's so hard, because sometimes we have to say, you're just not the right fit for this team. You don't have the same values, same beliefs, same goals that we have. And managing that moment is so critical, because if we do part ways with a player, there is going to be some conflict from the rest of the team. There are going to be players who say, you should have done that 6 months ago, coach, and I'm mad that you didn't. And then there are going to be others that say, you should have given her one more chance. I can't believe you let my best buddy go. And so having that foundation of how are we going to handle conflict on this team, because we've got to manage some of these difficult moments. We have to. It's absolutely, it comes back to our conversation about influence. Like, I have an opportunity to influence our team, but if I choose not to, if I choose to ignore this situation, then I'm not leveraging my influence. And so managing those moments and the conflict that could come is so, so critical on a team.
Absolutely, and again, there's so much within that on the course, on the Coach Ready course, which you can really take away. But I love how you build upon that and create that, because conflict in teams is going to arise, and then how we apply that and approach it really builds in how we lead that change, and then creating that high performance culture. Because there are those steps how we can get from conflict to high performance, and how we can interlink that. And that you've touched upon high performance previous within in some of the dialogue that we've had. But I love what you say about high performance and that culture, and there was again such a great quote, and so many great quotes which comes from Molly. Love changes people, people change the culture. I really love that, because you just, again, if you gift that player just that little bit of time, you gift them that love, they're going to really help change that culture, and it can change a room, it can change the dynamic, it can change the environment, those relationships, and that influence comes into play. And that is where the investment in people and transformation comes from, without giving too much away again on the course, but just touching upon nicely these great quotes, and what you can really learn upon delving into the course, how much actually comes into that, and high performing cultures and what that looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting that as I structured the course, I knew high performance was going to be in there someplace. I'm like, is it first? Is it last? I'm not really sure, because it's connected to every single piece of the course. But to me, I wanted to kind of kind of end with it, kind of close the door with high performance, because the truth is high performing people and high performing teams do things differently. They just do things differently. And if you've ever been a part of a high performing team, you can feel it. Sometimes it's hard to name, but you're like, these people do things differently here. And one of the consistent things that I see, it doesn't matter the sport, it doesn't matter the age or the level, high performing teams love their people because they understand the people are the ones that are going to create the outcome that we want. On low performing teams and average teams, you see the people as just machines, as cogs to create the outcome. And we become so focused on the outcome and then expect the people to just fall in line. If you will focus on your people, if you will love your people, invest in your people, connect with your people, all of that, they will create outcomes that you can't even dream of. And so when I hear people say, we got to focus on our culture, I'm like, ooh, let's rewind. We missed a step there. If you focus on your people, they will create the culture that you want and desire. And so we've got to make that investment in our people, and high performing teams do it consistently without question.
And again, it does come down to those people. You can change the habits and routines of those people, and not whereby they become robotic, but then you can actually give them that time and space. And there was one person, Toto Wolff, for example, no F1 experience behind him, and he went into the F1 world, took over a very successful F1 Mercedes team. And obviously, there's a lot of questions asked when you're not from that world and you're taking over a very successful team that has had that. And that high-performing team had gotten into a point where they weren't high-performing anymore, but they had a lot of success previously. So they were in a position where Toto Wolff had to come in and he had to identify areas of changing that. And he thought it was coming down to performance and how you look at that. But it wasn't actually down to the performance. It was down to the little things which impacted the people. So, changing the fruit in the fruit pot as they enter the building, little habits that changed that could impact people and how people could play their part, ended up leading to high performance. So those people over performance, and just that little tweak really helped change that dynamic, that environment, and that success to be high performing again.
Yeah, it's high performers do things differently. And again, this maybe comes back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning. You got to surround yourself by people that are different than you, because you're going to see that what a high performing CEO or president or leader of an organization does, how can you take some of that and apply that to your athletic team? But across the board, whether it's sports or whether it's corporate world, high performing people are invested in their people. No question about it.
Absolutely. And again, we've gone through all these units and so many key areas, but there is one which we have missed out, and one which I felt had to come into a consideration because, we looked at leadership, we looked at influence, we looked at that framework, we looked at team leaders, we looked at difficult moments and players, we've looked at conflict, we've looked at leading change and creating the high performance. But one key consideration that other coaches may not think, and I think comes within this, trauma and teams, and that plays such a big part.
Yeah, that was the unit that was the hardest to record, because I feel like all the other units feel so life-giving to me. And then we got to talk about trauma. And the reality is it would have felt really unethical to do this project and not talk about trauma, because every single coach has someone on their roster who's experienced trauma, or someone on their staff, or maybe they themselves have experienced trauma. And it is something that we don't talk about very often in athletics. We often look at someone who's experienced trauma and we say like, oh, they're so difficult and they're such a problem, and we got to get rid of them. But if I'm the most influential person in your life, I have an opportunity to say, hey, I can see some behaviors that might indicate that you've had some struggles in life. Let's get you the help you need so that you can have a healthier, happier experience. And just building some basic trauma awareness skills, I think, was really important for coaches. The reality is we could create 8 hours of just online material just about trauma. We just scratched the surface in Coach Ready. But understanding some of the ways trauma shows up so that you can almost have a lens to look at your team and say, oh, that might be a trauma response behavior, and that might be a trauma response behavior. We have some clues that are showing up on our team, but we don't even know that that's trauma that we need to be aware of. And again, if you're the most influential person in their life and you can help them navigate that a little bit, I think it's so, so critical. And I think we're coaching a generation that is more open to talking and to counseling and to therapy and to personal growth than any other generation we've ever worked with. If we look at most of our parents or grandparents, they weren't willing to do that. And so many young people now are. We've got to catch up to them in being educated on trauma and how it impacts the body and how it impacts relationships and how it impacts your sport performance, because it's there. Any coach that says there's no trauma on my team is delusional. It's there. And we've got to build that awareness and that ability to spot that on our rosters.
I think that's a really important reflection point, as well as a point for any coach starting out or where they're currently at, because we might think strategy, we might think high performance, we might think leadership and all these combinations, but we forget about trauma and where our athletes have come from or what they may actually be going through. And it's great because I was just doing a little bit of reading again before this, and I was just getting myself in a space where I could do a little bit of studying while I had the time. And I was reading, and there was a great one where a player called Sean Wayne, he actually endured trauma whereby he was in school less than he was that he should have been, so his teachers were barely seeing him, and he didn't have a great relationship with his father, and his father actually wanted to essentially kill him and didn't have a great relationship, and he chose one night to run away from home, and he never ever went back home from that point, and he left home in a holey shirt, no shoes, but he went on to be one of the highest performers and most successful coaches in the world of rugby that has ever existed, and that just shows that we can take high performers or have the opportunity for high performers to become that, away from trauma, despite what they've experienced. And it is going to be a tough time for them, and we have to address it. And sometimes, looking at avoidance or being in an avoidance situation, we just can't avoid certain situations, and trauma is one that we have to address.
Yeah, there's so much backstory to a person that we just don't know. We could think of it like an iceberg. There's all that stuff above the surface that we do know, and then there's all that stuff that we don't know. And we've got to be intentional about our relationships. And I would never tell a coach, sit down and ask 20 questions about trauma. That's not the way to go. But to be in relationship with our players so that when we hear those clues, we can start to make a mental note of, okay, these might be some challenges they're facing. I remember a women's basketball team that I was working with, and one of the coaches said, yeah, that player's got some real challenges. And I said, really? Like, what's the story? And they said, well, she's homeless. I said, wait a second, this is an elite women's basketball player at the college level. And then she said, yeah, at winter break, she has to go stay with friends. Her family is homeless. Like, well, okay, that's trauma, to be a college student and not have a home to go to, when you go home. And how do we talk about that? And how do we make sure she has the resources she needs? And how do we support her? Because everybody else is coming back from winter break or summer break and they're excited about the time they had with their family. She didn't have that. And so how does that impact her sense of worth and sense of value and purpose? We got to know those things, and we just got to make those mental checklists of, this is the stuff some of our players are struggling with, and how can we help them navigate that road?
And then, again, there's so much within that last minute of and 30 seconds where there's so much which you can consider and take into a framework to support those athletes just in trauma. And we've touched upon every unit, and we've covered what Coach Ready is and how that looks. So on the back of that, for anyone who's listening and for any coach, I would really suggest, signing up to Molly's course, because it is so insightful. And as you've heard her speak today, there is so much within this where there is so much more exploration on this course and how Molly can further support you for socials, and it's such a great course and one that I really enjoyed taking part of, and it's great that we could have this conversation to share this with yourselves, because it is one that I would definitely suggest signing up for, and something that you're going to take away into your own practice and really help develop your athletes. So it is with great appreciation that Molly has come on today to share this, and that I've been able to be part of it and help her, and learn from her within the process as well. So that's what coaching is, and this is just showing the great work that Molly's doing, and it's a big well done, and congratulations to Molly for forming this, and thinking of these athletes and coaches in the process, but a big thank you from me for appearing on the podcast and really making this connect and work for everyone and the coaching world involved.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was a fun conversation, and I think to bring it back to what we talked about at the beginning, I know I have some influence, and how do I want to leverage that? And I want to support coaches, be that lifeline, walk with them through difficult times. And so to me, it makes sense to have these conversations and to put products and services out there to support coaches who are doing such meaningful work. So appreciate the opportunity.
Anytime, and it's been great to have that likewise as well. And again, everyone can explore what you do even further through your website, which is shared just behind you, and they can connect through your socials, and they'll get to see the great work which you're doing. But I'm so glad and so thankful that we've been able to connect and make this happen, and really explore what Coach Ready is and how that can help people. But it is such a fantastic course, highly recommended, and I appreciate your time again, Molly, and hope this can help in some way further the course and access for the coaches listening.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
No worries, anytime.
All right.